It's a significant result. This is great. However, our experiment was confounded by one factor that is also confounding all the other touch research to date, which is that our confederate was not blind to the manipulation. She knew whether or not she had mediated, in a mediated form, touched the other person. Now, in unmediated touch, the confederate always knows whether or not they're touching another person, of course. And this gives you all kinds of processes that go on in terms of eye contact, nonverbal behavior, etc., which may confound the effects of touch. And we want to sort of isolate and see what touch does with respect to the other nonverbal cues that people share. Now, mediated touch is an interesting tool because we can actually control these confounds. We can exclude them. So we already excluded things like eye contact and all that, but now we can also exclude actually the knowledge that the confederate has of having touched the other person. So we get into more or less a double-blind situation. So what we did was we had the confederate, our confederate, press the touch button every single time, but as experimenters in the background, we were actually switching whether that touch was conveyed or not. And the participant didn't know which condition was which. When she dropped her pens, she wasn't, inadvertently giving some signal of, oh, I touched you just now, so maybe you want to help me. No, it's just, it's a more clean experimental design. And there we find that these differences diminish. They're still there, but to a lesser extent, and unfortunately not significant, which is quite important for us as psychologists to get stuff published, but nevertheless, we submitted it and published it anyway. And I think what we have here are two lessons. One is that we can see that overall, if you look at all the different studies that we've done so far, we've done a few, we see a similar effect to what happens in the unmediated touch conditions, right? So here are the unmediated touch data again, and here you see our data, and you can see they're quite similar in terms of effect size. Now we get two significant studies here, but this is the overall average. Actually, this is the overall average here. And what you can see is we have a little bit more noise around our data. But overall, we get similar results. And the effect size, which you can see here, is actually very much the same as in the mediated and the unmediated case, which sort of bodes well for the effects of mediated touch. It also gives a nice methodological point, which is that using mediated touch technology, we can actually do cleaner touch research. We can actually make our inferences on, what elements of touch are vital to the social importance of touch. We can pick it apart more or less. We can analyze it to a level that we can say, well, is it just the touch signal itself? What elements of the touch signal is it? Is it the social context that we're manipulating? Is it the fact that the confederate has knowledge about their, either touching or not? So these things we can manipulate and control. How am I doing on time? Because I'm now moving to, 3 more minutes? 30 minutes more. Oh, okay. Well, then I'm going to be taking it a bit slower because I'm already up to my 4th experiment here. So how can mediated social touch be improved then? We saw that on the
one notice, it's not 30 minutes. It's actually 15 minutes.
15. All right. It's fine. That's fine. So the how can we improve mediated social touch? We saw that the touch stimuli that we're using are quite poor in terms of their, how much they're like real touches. I mean, real touch consists of warmth, physical proximity. It's also a reciprocal experience. So one thing that we try to do is to look at whether it matters what kind of input device is being used. If you remember the design by Floyd Mueller, the hug over a distance, he thought about the input device as, he had the koala bear, which feels natural to hug as an input device, and, the At the output, there was the vest. And we thought, well, does it matter for a recipient of the touch if the sender of a touch pushes a button to touch somebody, or actually touches something that is like a real body? So we set up this idea of touching somebody either on through a mannequin. This is a, well, here you can see the picture of the mannequin as it was in our lab. And there were sensors inside the shirt that the mannequin is wearing, which were connected to our haptic vest. So basically, if the mannequin was touched on the back, the person wearing the haptic vest was also felt a touch on the back. And they saw on the screen the touch happening. They saw either the touch on the back of the mannequin, or they saw a button being pressed, which had the same effect in terms of their haptic vest. So either they had a, this is a button in Dutch saying bovenarm, upper arm. This is a button saying belly, buik. The question was, does it matter? Does it give you different sensation? Is it more arousing to be touched through something that looks like a like a person, or doesn't it matter? Is it just merely the fact that you're being touched through these electromechanical stimulation that already is enough, combined, of course, with the knowledge of somebody being there initiating that touch? Well, the effects that we found were quite interesting. Just a little bit more about the method here. We had 20 people come in. We had 20 male participants, 1 male Confederate, and we delivered 8 touches to various body parts, consisting of the belly, the back, upper arm, and lower arm. And we used self-reports, but we also used something called the skin conductance response, which is basically, measuring the resistance on your skin, which is a function of the sweat that you have in your sweat glands, and that again is a function of your level of arousal. So if you get more aroused, you sweat more, and the resistance drops. So what we found that was indeed, if people are touched through the mannequin, these are the same kinds of touches in terms of physical stimulation, but the attribution of the input device is either through a mannequin or through a touch screen. And we see that on the skin conductance response, it makes a real big difference in terms of arousal. So people get more aroused when the actual touch is being done on the mannequin than when it's done through a touch screen. So the input device matters as well, and probably also the meaning that you attach to it. We also see that people rate the sense of telepresence higher in the case of the mannequin, and also the naturalness of the interaction was rated higher. So, fair to conclude that mediated touch can be improved also by using appropriate visual feedback. So also thinking about the interface, actually, that's what we're saying here, matters for the effects of touch. What is on the other side? What are people using to touch you with? Now, to wrap up, I think there are a couple of points to be made based on this work. First of all, I think we're faced with an incredible design space. If we think about the number of variables that we as psychologists could manipulate and to change the meaning of touch and the sensory experience of touch, it's incredible. I mean, we'll be running experiments for decades still. But as designers, I think it's also really, really interesting to look at the different ways in which you can stimulate different body parts, and also look at how to create an appropriate context and how to create an appropriate interface for touching. And oddly enough, the most advanced interfaces at the moment are found in the sex industry, which has been traditionally maybe not regarded as the pinnacle of civilization, but I think what they're doing is really taking it serious, how the touch is being interpreted. Also, the design of the actual touch interface is done very seriously. And there are really some interesting designs out there. Most haptic devices that we've seen for mediated social touch are still quite clumsy and awkward and low fidelity. They're clearly explorations. We haven't, found the right, I think, the sweet spot in the design space yet. Now, our work has shown that that there is some evidence supporting the efficacy of mediated touch in terms of the touches, even if they're really impoverished, things like electromechanical vibrations, still being interpreted as socially meaningful interaction. And they will yield similar effects like the Midas touch effect. These effects are relatively noisy, and they might be a function of the poverty of the touch that we have. So if we touch somebody with something that resembles a human hand, I think we'll get much stronger effects. Of course, we want to explore other paradigms. We're currently looking at different kinds of experiments of touch. One being to help people relax in a dentist's office. So anxiety reduction during dental care. And we want to explore richer haptic feedback technologies, pressure, warmth, etc. Another point that I think is important, especially for researchers, is that mediated touch allow you to disentangle effects of touch, disentangle effects of context, really control for all these factors that normally would be all put together in a mix in an unmediated touch research. And we can improve our experimental control by avoiding confederate bias and also within and between confederate variability. Remember that if real people touch each other, there's always going to be differences in the way, in the pressure, in the responses, because it's an interactive process. So even if you train a confederate to do it really in a standardized manner, still you will get variability. You can't say the stimulus has been controlled perfectly. And we can't control for nonverbal cues that the confederate is expressing to other people. Some participants that come in the lab are more attractive than others, and inadvertently we will smile more, or, our eyes will light up. That's something we cannot control for with real people. It's something we can control for in a mediated setting. Finally, to look at applications, we're personally looking very much towards these educational and health applications perhaps in elderly care, where it's known that if people with Alzheimer are touched, they start eating better and they start being more sociable. It could also provide a potential alternative to chemical sedation for anxious patients during clinical procedures, which is a really good thing to have. But of course, looking at, for instance, the persuasive effects of touch, we can see all kinds of applications in terms of online negotiation or e-commerce applications. And the most obvious one, of course, being touch between lovers, partners, people that are remote and want to be able to be with each other and to touch each other at a distance. An important thing, I think, also is that we're empowering the touch recipient. If you're being touched in a face-to-face situation, you have little control over the fact that you're being touched, other than just stepping back, enlarging the personal space. But a touch recipient of a mediated touch might actually completely control if they're being touched, where they're being touched, how they're being touched, by controlling the haptic output device that they're carrying around. So I think these are really interesting perspectives, which also yield interesting design challenges. And this is where I'd like to end this talk and open up the floor for questions and discussion. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? I see a couple. Okay, in the back, yeah?
Most of your research was focused how males feel the interaction.
certainly in the gender effects, it's really of importance to use males because there the homophobic effect is biggest. With the Midas touch, the sort of going paradigm in that world is that is of the damsel in distress, let's say. So you have a lady who drops something, and are the men, willing to help? Actually, what we find in most of the unmediated touch work that's being done, some of it's being done in France, for instance, you can see that overall the helping behavior is higher than what we find in our university. And I'm not sure whether it's because Dutch people are more rude or because we're at a technical university and these guys are a little awkward with women. I don't know, but so the difference is the same, but actually overall in France they help a little more, even if they haven't been touched. Cultural differences matter as well, I think. But you're right in observing that most of our participants have been male. But this is not a matter of principle. I think a lot of these things, like the Midas touch, will also work for females. Other questions? Yeah?
I have one question about the experiment with mannequin and touchscreen. Do you thought about checking what would be the result if you use the buttons more like with texture? Because as I recall, you used touchscreen that was made from glass, yeah?
Yes, absolutely right, yeah.
So it didn't have the texture. You don't feel the button, the shape, the texture. So do you thought about checking this? What would be the result if you use maybe more analogical buttons?
Okay, maybe I didn't completely explain this correctly, because this guy who's touching there is our confederate. So he's doing the touches, and the person being touched is wearing this haptic vest, right? And the person being touched sees the either the mannequin or the glass screen being touched. So from that perspective, I would not expect a big difference if this person would be touching it on a glass pane rather than a physical button. Although there is, of course, enhancing the physicality of the touch act might have an effect, but I'm not sure. My intuition, my gut instinct tells me that it might not be a big difference because, it's a button. It's not like it has more of a likeness to, let's say, a physical body. What the original idea that we had with this experiment, we jokingly called it the voodoo experiment in our lab, because we had this idea of using a voodoo doll as an input device. And just, when a doll looks like you, do people feel, more touched or more, their intimacy being violated, perhaps? If people use as an input device something that looks like you versus something that doesn't look like you. That was more or less the dichotomy, and we worked it out to become, this kind of a manipulation. I must say, we haven't controlled for a lot of the parameters in this design space. There's lots of things different between a mannequin as an input device and a glass pane as an input device. I mean, I fully agree with that. We haven't looked at, the tangibility of the input device or stuff like that. But my intuition would say that I think it's the similarity to a person's body, and being able to identify with that remote input device, psychologically identify with that makes the touch more intimate.
So basically, it's more about the context and the impact. If I see you are touching a mannequin, so it's more like a human, this gives more impact to me, yeah?
Yeah. That's exactly right. Okay.
We are still working on the microphones. Any other questions? Try without microphone, okay? Oh, it's working. It's working now. Okay.
Hi. Have you maybe stumbled upon some researches on trying to create the expression, create the experience of touch without devices, such devices as this shirt or something?
I have stumbled across research where they are trying to create haptic illusion without using haptic devices, but they use visual feedback, for instance. So there is some work on, for instance, if you move a mouse over a certain surface on the screen, and you play with the speed of the mouse's response, let's say across certain areas, you can actually create an illusion that there's a resistance in the feeling on the mouse where there's none. I mean, there's no resistance, but just the speed of the feedback, it already gives you a sense of some physical resistance in the mouse. So there's some work on how to visually capture some haptic illusions, let's say. And some work that was done in our university by Koert van Mensvoort, for instance. He did his PhD on this kind of work. There's also been some work in augmented reality and virtual reality environments by Frank Bioka, who's looked at if you provide visual feedback on, for instance, medical surgery procedures, do people interpret that as haptic feedback? And they do. So, yeah, there is that cross-modal interaction, definitely. Other questions? Yeah?
Yeah, over there.
You mentioned Ring-U. Is it already, is the Ring-U already commercially available product, or is it only
Try to.
The question
turn
is
on the
whether
microphone.
Ring-U is an already commercially available product. I frankly I don't know. Adrian Chiuk is as far as I know, he's quite serious about this particular product, but I'm not sure whether he's founded a company and is actually producing these at large quantities and selling them. I don't know, but you could Google it and probably find out. It's been in the media, and which is why I came across it as well. But so, many of these design explorations are just that. They're design explorations. They're not out to be marketed, and they're also, you can already see that the form factor of these things are certainly not mature enough to be marketed. The Ring-U is indeed more or less an exception in that to that rule. It seems to be more mature as a technology and as an interface, so it might be available. I don't know. In the back, yeah.
Thanks. I was just wondering if this has been used in a 3D environment, because if you think about it, even if you're watching a 3D movie, you kind of feel like you'd be touched, but there is no physical contact. So if we actually made it this way, then I think that would be 100% more effective.
You're absolutely right. There are more in the area of the haptic feedback technologies that I mentioned earlier. There are a lot of devices that allow you to interact with 3D environments, also haptically interact with 3D environments. They're hugely expensive usually because there's a lot of degrees of freedom that you need to support. There's a lot of different tactile sensations that you need to support. One system we have ourselves in our lab is the Reach-In system, which allows you to look at a stereoscopic scene and at the same time probe it with a pen, which gives you haptic feedback. And because that stereoscopic scene is projected exactly the spot where you feel the haptic feedback, it's an amazingly convincing experience that you're actually having a physical product there, where there's thin air. It's just bits and bytes, and it's just amazingly convincing. Yeah, so that if all the senses start working together and telling the same story, that's an incredibly strong experience. Yeah.
Hi there. Well, I wanted to ask you about motivation. You talked about, like sex industry. So I guess that obviously the motivation in such an industry is different than, when you hug each other or whatever. So this leads me to a question: is a vest like that ever going to be a product that you can commercially utilize? Would I wear a vest if I were, 2,000 miles away from my wife? Would I buy a vest so we can, hug each other, at that distance? Is it enough of a motivation to actually, invest in something like that? So basically, my question is it commercially viable? You know?
Well, I haven't done any market research on this, so you're getting an N is 1 response now, which is just my personal gut feeling. Very unscientific. I would agree with you that, you know, some of these contraptions seem a little elaborate for getting something buzzing on your body and while you're away from your loved ones. But I can see that there's more of a motivation for sex toys to for people to go, you know, to a larger extent, to a larger length of accepting technology for that. But yeah, I think for me probably I think the most valuable designs will probably be more intimate, smaller, you know, really wearable, you know, size factors of mobile phones and such. But I could imagine we would wear a T-shirt or something in you know, embedded or embroidered into clothing that actually also is attached to your mobile phone, which actually gives you, you know, in addition to wearing the garment that like you usually do, also some communication options. So I think there will be a convergence of industries actually with the clothing manufacturing industry and, let's say, the remote communication and actuator industry. So from my perspective, I think that will be the way to go. So integrated with currently existing things that we do want, you know, wear, integrated within our context of already our daily living. I don't think these very let's say very specific design explorations that I've shown are going to be really huge successes on the market, because nobody's going to carry around a box with a straw going around to be able to remote you know, French kiss your girlfriend. You know, I think you're right in that, you know, to be a little skeptical about the commercial viability of those kinds of designs. Yeah.
I was just wondering right now after the question that if you think about it, like I work at P&G, so we have a lot of like virtual stores per se. So for example, if you used kind of the touch effect, like if you're doing research with people, like alive people who go and touch things in the store, this is more like eye tracking. You only rent it when you need it, right? Mm-hmm. So wouldn't that be an immediate kind of need that you would get for companies that actually want to sell more?
Yeah. So if you're thinking about online stores now, I presume, or are you?
Well, this is not pretty much online stores. Like, one part is, yes, online stores, but the other part is, like, in my company, you would go into this virtual kind of store. Mm-hmm. For us, we want to see how the consumer would behave in a store, what they would touch, where they would look.
Right. Right, yeah, so touch behavior would be very indicative of, I think, interest, much like eye tracking as well, is what you're indicating. I think also for e-commerce applications, being able to touch a product is, you know, for some products is really important. But the kinds of touches that I'm talking about in this respect is also the let's say the presence of a salesperson who would be, you know, also be able to touch you and then be able to be more convincing, for instance, generate a state of mind that makes people more conducive to buying a product.
So that wouldn't actually have anything to do with like the texture and how you touch things. And
no,
so
the texture thing I think is more related to the haptic feedback technology I showed earlier. Let me just quickly go to that particular. Sorry about this. Here we go. This kind of technology, right? So that requires much more degrees of freedom. It requires much more detail in terms of the kinds of textures that could be simulated. So from a technology point of view, this is really challenging to make high fidelity touch interfaces. And there's lots of research going into that, especially also in the European Union, actually being funded by the European Commission. What they haven't funded yet, and I think should be funding as well, is the touch, the social aspects of touch, which are different from from some of these aspects, because we're not looking for, let's say, the highest possible fidelity of simulating the material to its in great detail, but we're looking for creating touches that are socially significant, and that might utilize technologies that are not so expensive, not so complicated as the ones that we're using for haptic feedback. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of haptic feedback, and we're also utilizing that in virtual reality, etc. But for socially meaningful touch, I think we're already showing that very simple, relatively untouch-like touches are already processed in ways that are socially meaningful.